Alright guys, so today we're going to talk about parallel and perpendicular lines. What We're going to go through some notes first before we get into the math, just to go over like what parallel lines are and what perpendicular lines are. So parallel lines are lines that do not intersect. So intersect means that do not intersect means that they will not cross over each other, they will not touch each other. Perpendicular lines do intersect, and they intersect specifically to form 90-degree angles. Alright, so notation. The shorthand or the notation for a parallel line is these two vertical bars. So when you see that, it means parallel. For perpendicular, we have this upside down T, so that means perpendicular. Alright, so we're focusing specifically on these lines in the coordinate plane, so on a graph, which means that these lines are going to have equations. And in those equations, we're looking specifically at the slope. So parallel lines have the same slope, and perpendicular lines have opposite reciprocal slopes. I'm going to put an asterisk here so that we can go through and figure out what opposite reciprocal means. Alright, so just to recap really quickly, parallel lines do not intersect and they have the same slope. Perpendicular lines do intersect and form 90-degree angles, and they have opposite reciprocal slopes. Alright, so now we're going to go through and define exactly what opposite reciprocal means. So opposite in this context just means that we are changing our sign. So if we have a positive, we're changing it to a negative, or if we have a negative, we are changing it to a positive. So that's all opposite means. Alright, reciprocal is flipping the fraction. So we're switching the bottom to the top and the top to the bottom. So we're going to do a couple examples of finding the reciprocal. So I'm going to draw my arrow and my fraction bar. So I'm going to start at the top. If 1 is at the top in the reciprocal, 1 will be at the bottom. 3 is at the bottom and it will move to the top. So we have 3 over 1. So anytime we have a number that is over 1, we can just take the top and that will be our answer. So the reciprocal of 1 over 3 is 3 over 1, or just 3. So same thing for number 2. I'm going to draw my arrow, my fraction bar. 6 is at the bottom, it's going to move to the top. 5 is at the top, it's going to move to the bottom. Alright, before we find the reciprocal of number 2, I'm going to rewrite it as a fraction. So any whole number, I can write it as a fraction over 1. So 2 is the same as 2 over 1. And now I'm going to find the reciprocal of it. So 1 is at the bottom, it's going to move to the top. 2 is at the top, it's going to move to the bottom. So those are all of my reciprocals. So an opposite reciprocal is just when we change the sign and flip the fraction. Alright, so we're going to do a couple of examples of finding the opposite reciprocal. Alright, so looking at this first example, we are changing the sign first. So negative is going to turn into a positive. We do not write the positive sign when we have a positive number. We just leave it by itself. So I'm not going to put a sign in front of it. I'm just going to draw my fraction bar. Bottom is going to move to the top. Top is going to move to the bottom. So the opposite reciprocal of negative 2 over 3 is going to be positive 3 over 2. I'm going to do the same thing here, draw my arrow. Now this is positive, and I know because it doesn't have a negative in front of it. So the opposite of positive is negative. I'm going to draw my negative sign and my fraction bar. So 5 was at the bottom, we're moving it to the top. 1 was at the top, we're moving it to the bottom. So I have negative 5 over 1, which I can write as just negative 5. And our last example, I'm also going to rewrite this as negative 4 over 1, and then we're going to find our reciprocal. Opposite of negative is positive, so we're not putting any sign in front of there. Bottom goes to the top, top goes to the bottom. So these are all examples of opposite reciprocals. Alright, we're going to go through a couple of examples, and these are the quote-unquote easy problems, and we're going to read through them. So find the slope of a line that is parallel to y equals 1/2 x plus 3. So in these problems, we are just finding the slope. So parallel, I'm going to do that in blue. So remember, parallel means we have the same slope. So I'm going to use the equation y equals mx plus b, and this number that is in front of the x is always my slope. So I'm going to find that number here. In this example, it's 1/2. So my slope, or my m, is going to be 1 over 2. And because they're parallel lines and their slopes are the same, this is my answer. Alright, easy. For number 2, I'm going to go through and highlight that as well. So we're still finding the slope of a line that is perpendicular to y equals 1/2 x plus 3. I'm going to do this in red. So perpendicular means we have our opposite reciprocal slope. Alright, so again, the number in front of my x is my slope, which makes my slope 1/2. So to find my opposite reciprocal, I'm going to draw my arrow. Positive means our opposite reciprocal is going to be negative. Top goes to the bottom, bottom goes to the top. So I have negative 2 over 1, which I can take just the top part of that, negative 2. So my m, or my slope, is negative 2. So whenever we have a problem like this, we always want to start by finding our slope. Alright, so now we're going to move into the problems that are a little bit more difficult. And these, we just have to tie in a little bit more of our algebra knowledge to find the answer. So we are finding the equation. So now we're finding the entire equation instead of just the slope of a line that is parallel to y equals 4x minus 2 and passes through the point 1, 5. Alright, so I'm going to do this in blue. We have parallel which means our slopes are the same. And that is going to be that number in front of my x, so my slope is 4. Now I'm going to write this standard slope-intercept form equation, which is just y equals mx plus b. And I'm going to take what I know. Right now I know my m and substitute that in. So instead of m, I'm going to write that 4x plus b. So now I want to be able to solve for my b so that I can get an equation that looks like the one in the problem. So what we are going to do is, I have x and y values that the problem itself gives me. So coordinate points are always written x, y. So my line has to go through those points, which means I can use those values to solve for my b or my y intercept. So I'm going to substitute each of those values back into this equation. So I have, instead of y, I'm going to write 5 equals, my 4 is going to stay there. When we have a number and a variable next to each other, it means we're multiplying them. So I'm going to show that by adding some parentheses. Instead of x, I'm going to write a 1. And then I'm going to go plus b. And now I can solve for my problem. My blue pen went away. Alright, so I'm going to multiply this out first. I'm going to bring everything else down. So I have equals plus b, and I'm going to bring down my 5. So 4 times 1 is 4. And now I only have one variable, so I can solve for b. I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. That's going to cancel. And I'm going to have b equals 1. Alright, so now I'm going to go back up here. I have y equals, I know my m is 4, x, and I know my b is 1. And this will be my final answer. So the line y equals 4x plus 1 is parallel to y equals 4x minus 2, and will pass through those 2 points. Alright, so now we're going to look at example 4. So now we're going to find the equation of a line. So we're still looking for an equation of a line that is perpendicular now to y equals 4x minus 2 and passes through the point 4, 1. Alright, so I'm going to do this in red. So perpendicular means we have our opposite. I'm going to abbreviate reciprocal slope. So my slope is still 4. Now I have to find the opposite reciprocal of it. So positive is going to turn into a negative. I have 4 over 1. So 1 is going to go at the top, 4 is going to go at the bottom. So my new slope is negative 1 over 4. I'm going to do the same thing and start with that standard slope-intercept form. So I have y equals mx plus b, and I'm going to substitute that negative 1 over 4 for my m, and then write out the rest of the equation. So same as in example 1, I need to solve for this b, and I'm going to use the 2 points that they gave me to do that. So I have x comma y, which means instead of y, I'm going to write 4 equals negative 1 over 4. Instead of x, I'm going to draw my parentheses. I'm going to write, this should be 1. 1, and instead of x, I'm going to write 4. And then plus b. So substitute your y for your y and your x for your x. I was going to flip it, and that wouldn't give us the right answer. Alright, so now I'm going to multiply this out. So I still have 1 equals, so now I have negative 1 times 4 is going to give me negative 4. I'm going to go over 4 because my denominator is going to stay the same, plus b. So negative 4 divided by 4, still have 1 equals, negative 4 divided by 4 is negative 1, plus b. And now I want to solve for b, so I have to get rid of that negative 1. To get rid of a negative, I'm going to add 1 and add 1. That's going to cancel. So I have 1 plus 1 is 2, and 2 equals b. And I'm going to come back to my y equals. My slope is negative 1 over 4. X, and my b is 2, and this will be my final answer. Alright, so I'm posting these notes up on Google Classroom so you can go back and reference them, and I'm also posting some IXLs or Delta Math for you guys to do, or quizzes. So whichever one of those 3 activities you want to do, you can use the notes, you can reference this video, and I will be available to help if you need that as well.